One of the hardest part about being a manga fan is waiting for literal years to get like 10 chapters. I mean, we got like 4 chapters of Berserk this year, and that's already better than the past decade. Still, we've got hope that we'll get at least 3 more Berserk chapters this year based on the quarterly release schedule, which means that chapter 384 should be coming our way real soon, fingers crossed. But what exactly can you expect from chapter 384? If that question's been bothering you, then you've come to the right place. These are all of our marvelous predictions for Berserk chapter 384 Explained. What happened to Guts in Berserk 383? The latest chapter of Berserk has to be one of the most somber chapters in franchise history because it features about 6 lines of dialogue, and yet it tells a story worth 1,000 words. It begins where chapter 382 left off, with Guts entering the Kushan Stupa after giving Isidro and Puck one last look. At the end of 382, we thought that this would be the last time we'd see Guts for a while, and we were right, after a fashion that is. See, the thing is, the guy we've been following since the destruction of Elfhelm isn't Guts because he doesn't act like the Guts we know and love. It's said that once a person loses their will to live, they become nothing more than a walking corpse, and by that metric, Guts has died a long time ago. He's been doing all sorts of uncharacteristic things, like getting captured without resisting and even submitting to death. When Rakshas showed up in his Kushan jail cell, Guts was ready to die. He even calls Rakshas his angel of death, despite the fact that his brand is clearly telling him there's an apostle in front of him. The Guts we know would have broken out of his fetters and bitten Rakshas to death just because he's connected to Griffith. But like we said earlier, this man is no longer Guts. A combination of helplessness and despair have turned him into a living corpse, which makes his march to the stupa in 382 nothing more than a funeral procession. In fact, chapter 383 says that Guts was interred within the stupa, which is extremely specific language that backs up what we've been saying about him. Interment is only done to a corpse, with funeral rites attached to the process, and considering our hero has lost his will to live, that's exactly what he's become. So, the events of chapter 383 can also be seen as him going through the highlight reel of his life, despite said reel containing only 2 images. The first image was of Griffith and Casca during the golden age of the Falcons, and the second was Guts' most recent conscious memory, where Casca was kidnapped by Griffith. It's interesting that the people at Studio Gaga chose these 2 specific images to invoke at such a major turning point for his character, because you'd think it would involve the eclipse too. When Kentaro Miura was writing the series, the eclipse was a focal point of Guts' life, with it showing up in several different forms throughout the story. Sometimes it would pop up as a memory, other times as an unintentional trigger. He even created an entire dreamscape out of it when he walked us through Casca's corridor of dreams. But to see it completely missing from 383 is odd to say the least, because we figured that if Guts was going to completely give in to his Black Swordsman persona, then it would be front and center. But as we learn from those 6 lines of dialogue, that's not exactly the case here. As day turns to night, Daiba and Salat stand watch outside the stupa, waiting for Guts to emerge, because that's apparently a key part of their plan to defeat Griffith. Salat grows impatient as always, but Daiba chastises him by reminding him that this is more like a personal awakening. He explains that when a person is deprived of their senses, then all that's left for them to gaze at is themselves. And this appears to be the true purpose of putting Guts into the stupa. We all figured that Daiba was going to sacrifice him or something and flip to Griffith's side, but turns out he just wanted to create the right environment for self-reflection. Based on his words and our understanding of Berserk, Guts has been isolated so he can rediscover his resolve, because despite the fact that he fights like a mad dog, Guts is still the best chance humanity has at defeating Griffith. Daiba was merely setting the stage for him to remember that he's still alive and choose to continue to live in opposition to his despair instead of giving into it. So that's the basic gist of what happened in 383. Guts has been put in the right place, presumably at the right time, to regain his sense of purpose and unlock whatever power lies dormant within the stupa. Except you might have noticed we haven't touched on one aspect of the chapter, which is the stupa's interior. It's perhaps one of the creepiest locations we've seen in Berserk yet. Yeah, even more so than Clipoff, and there's a reason for that, because it's just so damn dark and disorienting. The inside of the Kushan Stupa might just deserve a video of its own, but for now, we'll be moving on to our next prediction, which is Guts going through an eclipse? While he's explaining his rationale behind putting Guts in the stupa, Daiba tells Salat something rather interesting. He says that the inside of the stupa is disconnected from the outside world, and the barrier between them is so powerful that not even his magical arts can pierce through it. What this basically means is that the stupa's interior lies within the astral world, which is a bombshell of a revelation. There are only a handful of locations within Berserk that overlap with the physical world so blatantly. There's Elfhelm, Flora's spirit Tree Mansion, the Cave of the Sea God, and now the Kushan Stupa. Each of these places serves as a concentration of astral energy and entities, and their link to the physical world is strong yet delicate. Several conditions need to be met in order for them to remain within the physical world. For example, the boundary that Flora erected around her mansion. It was meant to be an early warning defense system on the surface, but the truth of it is that it separated her mansion's occupied space from the outside world. Whenever she wasn't in the mood for unwanted visitors, Flora would strengthen its magic, and those people would end up feeling like they're lost in the woods. Spatial and temporal magic hasn't been discussed too heavily in the series so far, yet their presence within it seems to be all-pervasive. The Sea God's cave prison was sealed with a massive statue, which Griffith broke during the Great Roar of the astral world, which is how it was able to exert its influence directly upon the world again. Elfhelm had several defensive layers to protect it from invaders, because while the island it was located on was in the physical world, the village of Elfhelm itself was an entirely spiritual existence. This is why, when Griffith invades it, we see the remnants of the island still within the physical world, while its astral inhabitants disappear. By that same logic, it makes perfect sense that a space like the Kushan Stupa exists, because it adheres to the same basic principles of spatial and temporal magic. It's a closed-off space that can only be entered by specific people under specific conditions, and there's even a giant fallen statue behind it to prove our point even further. But the reason it's so creepy is because all there is inside of it is a small pool with a giant lotus leaf on it, and the lotus leaf also looks oddly fleshy and veiny, as though it were made of human flesh. Guts actually falls upon it when he enters the stupa's interior because he can't see a damn thing, but as he tries to get up, something makes him fall again. He then notices that the walls are crawling with the blood blobs he saw in St. Albion and then later at Elfhelm, and he thinks to himself that death is finally coming for him. Based on his experiences, we can't call his thought process entirely wrong, because whenever those blood blobs have made an appearance, a massive tragedy has occurred. And the final shot of the chapter shows the lotus leaf closing all around Guts in a spherical shape as he sinks into the pool beneath it, which also appears to be bottomless. All of this makes it feel like Guts is about to be taken over by demons, and we can't fault you for thinking that. After all, the setup feels a lot like an event similar to the Eclipse. Guts has entered an astral place and given into his despair and his desire to die, which triggered the lotus leaf to become a substitute for the cocoon within which Griffith was wrapped during the Eclipse, and then Guts sinks into the pool, much like Griffith did after sacrificing his closest friends and comrades. The blood blobs remind us of the incarnation ceremony, where Griffith used the lives of several thousand humans to create a body of flesh for himself, and if you put the Eclipse and the incarnation ceremony together, then the scene starts resembling the flashback from chapter 362, which showed us how King Gysric became the Skull Knight in the first place. So all the elements are there for this to become a Shadow Eclipse event, and Kujimori, the current director of Berserk, drew a parallel between what happened in 383 with the Eclipse on Twitter. He said it a while before the chapter dropped, but after reading it, we can't shake off that comment so lightly, seeing as he inserted all the visual cues to the Eclipse within it. But the reason we don't think this is going to be a proper eclipse is quite simple actually. It's the fact that Daiba puts the onus of the outcome of this ritual on Guts himself. We know from the many times that the God Hand has been discussed that causality isn't exactly the type of thing that waits for people to make their decisions. It forces them in the direction it wants them to take, and more often than not, people fall right into its hands, or massive eye-covered heart, if you prefer that level of accuracy. Self-reflection and choice are simply not options it presents to the person it selects to become an agent of evil, because even causality knows that if you reflect hard enough, you might just end up fixing your ways. From the way Daiba structured the explanation of what's happening inside, it's more likely that whatever's waiting for Guts is going to let him make that final decision about whether he wants to live and fight or die and end up in hell, because as a branded individual, that's exactly where his soul is headed. All who are marked with the brand of sacrifice already have one foot within the astral world because they're intended to be ritual sacrifices. The only destination their souls will ever know is the abyss, where the vortex of souls whirls endlessly, and that's not a choice. Daiba worked with an apostle for several years, so he must be aware of this fact, and yet he has now put Guts in a spot where he might be subjected to the depths of the astral world once more, on the off chance that it might awaken something useful within him. The Paramarishi Senani is nothing if not efficient, because he was the one who suggested Ganishka create his Daka and Pishacha armies in the first place, so maybe this is just the most efficient way out there to ensure that Guts gets his head back on right and joins the war at maximum strength. There would be no other reason for him and Salat to continue hanging around the stupa, seeing as Griffith's troops are already harassing the Kushan Empire's western borders. And so, taking all of this into consideration, we want to posit the theory that Guts is not going to go through through an eclipse. Instead, he's going to go through some sort of process that's similar to it, but a lot more spiritually enlightening, considering the fact he's following the footsteps of several ancient Kushan priests. Remember that a stupa is primarily meant to serve as a tomb and a final resting place for the highest of Kushan monks, and if all of them had to face this lotus test, as we're going to call it, then it doesn't make sense for an eclipse to occur here. That would mean that several eclipse-like events have taken place without the God Hand's knowledge, and that's just not possible. What's more likely is that the opposite of an eclipse is going to take place in the next chapter, a reverse eclipse, if you will, and that's going to be far more interesting to dissect. The fact that Guts thought of the good old days and then thought of the most helpless moment of his life is indication that he hasn't quite given up yet, at least not entirely. Guts has been blaming himself for Casca's kidnapping, not because he couldn't predict or stop it, but because his usual methods didn't work. What broke him was the fact that his sword, which he relied on for everything up until that point, failed him in his most critical hour of need. Guts' problem at this moment isn't with Griffith, it's with himself, and that's something self-reflection can definitely help him work on. During the Golden Age, he didn't worry about losing or going off script during battle because his comrades' blades would back his up, but when Griffith showed up in front of him, he forgot about all that, and it cost him Casca. While the lotus leaf itself is symbolic of spiritual detachment in Buddhism, which plays a massive role in the events of the last couple of chapters, it also symbolizes purity and spiritual awareness, two things Griffith certainly does not possess. So, if an eclipse is indeed coming for Guts, like much of the Berserk community believes, then it won't be the same as Griffith's. We'll go deeper into what it might look like in a separate video on our proposed reverse eclipse, but for now, our first major prediction is that Guts will not become a demonic warrior who leeches off the same power source that has taken over the entire world. Because if he does, what's the point of storytelling? At that point, we should just forget everything we know about stuff like narratives and character arcs and just go all in on nihilism. But having brought up that word, nihilism, let's check in on our favorite nihilist in the whole wide world, because we have a feeling we might be seeing him again real soon. Is Griffith going to return in Chapter 384? This is something we always speculate on whenever it comes to a new Berserk chapter, but to be fair to ourselves, it's still a valid question. Ever since he incarnated into the physical world, Griffith has become an even more magnetic personality, both narratively and literally. People are literally drawn in by his overwhelming life force, which was best illustrated during his Elfhelm invasion when Shirke nearly got caught up in the torrent of his ode. But the reason we feel somewhat confident in saying that we'll see Griffith again soon is because all the elements are already in place. Berserk is a series that loves creating crisis events exactly when you least expect them. It follows this pattern of escalation until it reaches the inevitable climax, and whether you like it or not, the penultimate battle between Griffith and Guts is drawing closer faster than you might expect. Before his passing, Miura said that he was gearing up to depict the first major duel between his protagonist and antagonist as part of the series' final arc, and well, that's already happened. Guts swung his sword at Griffith 100 different ways on Elfhelm, and not one stroke reached his actual physical body. Since that day, we've only seen Griffith once, in Chapter 372, when we cut to Falconia for an update on Casca. Turns out, he has her bewitched with some kind of memory spell because she no longer remembers her previous life with Guts and the gang until she splashes some water on her face, that is, and the last time we saw Falconia itself was in Chapter 380 when Shirke finally arrived at the city after several days of wandering through the Dragon Path. Berserk has been shifting between plot points quite erratically since Miura-sensei's death, with even the Kushan-focused chapters following different characters at different points in time, as opposed to giving us one cohesive plot update. This is why we believe that even if Griffith doesn't appear in person in the next chapter, we might catch a glimpse of him and Casca within Falconia, because Shirke's quest is the only open plot thread that hasn't been depicted in the detail it deserves. We managed to connect the west to the east when the Black Swordsman party made contact with the Kushan Empire, we caught up with Casca's fate as a prisoner of the most powerful demon on Earth, and we've been tailing Guts ever since Raksha showed up within the Kurultai Council Chamber. The only person we don't have any details on is Shirke, and now that Guts is sinking to the depths of the abyss-like pool within the stupa, it's the perfect time to catch up with her. The last time we saw her, she was already at the main entrance to Falconia, and she seemed quite determined to rescue Casca. Now that the rest of the gang has nothing to do except wait for Guts to emerge from his transformation session, we think checking in with Shirke way, even for half a chapter, won't be a problem for the studio, especially because there's already a visual cue linking her and Guts from chapter 383, which is the moment from 376 when she pulls him out of a torrent not dissimilar to the one that he's swallowed by in the former. A transition from that to Shirkei's woman hunt in Falconia isn't impossible, but we think that either way, Griffith is long overdue for an appearance. The last time we saw him, he was staring at the World Tree and telling his top soldiers that they need to hit the east next. We were then informed by Salat that Falconia's warriors were already attacking Kushan's western outposts, and that was before the capital nearly drowned in a sea of blood thanks to Rakshas and a pack of trolls. If that was a preemptive strike on the city by the God Hand, then getting a follow-up on it, even if it lasts for a couple of pages, is completely irrelevant. And we'd be lying if we said that we weren't waiting to get more insight into Griffith's plans for his continued campaign as well as his marriage ceremony. Let us not forget, amidst all this chaos, that Griffith still isn't the king of Falconia, at least not officially. He might be running the place thanks to his power and charisma, but the true person in charge is his future wife, Queen Charlotte. With Casca being in the same city as her, court intrigue is bound to spring up, and it would also give us a nice change of pace. And, lest we forget, the fact that he and Casca were shown twice in 383 may also point towards their appearance being set up for 384. So, for all those reasons and more that we can't fit into this video, we predict we'll witness some form of Griffith-based chicanery in the next chapter of Berserk. But until the release date is announced, that's just a prediction, not a spoiler. So, as always, make like Paul Heyman and take it with a pinch of kosher salt. Marvelous verdict! So, those are our predictions for Berserk 384, but what do you guys think? Will we see Griffith again, or are we going to continue following Guts on his pseudo-eclipse descent? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content. We'll see you guys in the next one, so until then, stay safe, and don't forget to keep on struggling, strugglers.